We bring you, though, first, the growing crisis between the U.S. and Russia over Ukraine.
NBC News confirms the U.S. has warned the United Nations it believes Russia has plans to kill or arrest critics and dissidents in Ukraine if there's invasion. Some could be sent to camps. Today, Russia is denying this. So what's next? President Biden and Russian President Putin have agreed to meet, at least in principle, only if Russia does not invade Ukraine. But three sources, including two White House officials, say a final decision on a summit would be made only after further talks. Those talks between Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov are scheduled for Thursday.
Look, we're doing everything we can, and it's my responsibility to do everything I can to try diplomatically to prevent a war. And so I will leave no stone unturned to do that.
We have a team of correspondents covering this. NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bodner is in Moscow, and correspondent Matt Bradley joins us from Ukraine, about 25 miles from the Russian border. Good morning to both of you. Matt Bodner, let's start with you in Moscow. President Biden has said quite clearly he believes that Putin has already decided to invade Ukraine. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin says Russian forces are in a strike position. So what, if any, hope should we have for this meeting between Presidents Biden and Putin?
Thank you, Joe. Well, that's basically the question that plagues us all at this moment. So we saw a lot of kind of positive signals from the French, from the White House overnight, that there is a possibility of a meeting. But as we've seen several times now throughout this crisis, the Kremlin this morning almost immediately poured cold water on most of those signals, with at the daily Kremlin press briefing, Dmitry Peskov saying basically it is way too soon to be talking about a meeting between Biden and Putin. He said really the only substantial agreement on any kind of dialogue at this point with the U.S. is that meeting between Blinken and Lavrov later this week. And then once that's done, they can then start to look at something moving beyond that. But he said, he did continue to emphasize, though, that President Putin, President Biden can at any time decide to have a meeting. But that's a pretty standard Peskov line. All of this is happening, by the way, while we continue to see claims of escalation by the Russian media, by the separatists in Donetsk and Luhansk, of escalations provoked by the Ukrainians, all basically unsubstantiated. Lots of very strange videos that's really kind of capturing the narrative, framing it in a certain way here in Russia, that the Ukrainians are preparing something. We're even seeing claims today that they are already engaged in offensives in certain parts. So in a way, they're already dialing things up here on this end. So is this just an example of even more coercive diplomacy or not? We just don't know at this point, but basically, we're looking forward to this meeting with Biden and Lavrov on Thursday.
Yeah, Matt Bradley, let's talk more about this. Well, that potential Biden-Putin meeting offers a small glimmer of hope. We're seeing that massive uptake in reports of fighting in Russian-backed separatist enclaves in Ukraine. It was a violent weekend there. What more can you tell us about what's happening there?
Yeah, it was a very violent weekend. We're starting to see an increase in the tempo of these sort of engagements between Ukrainian regular forces and those separatists that Matt Bodner just mentioned in Donetsk and Luhansk, which is kind of near to where I am right now in Kharkiv. But, two Ukrainian soldiers were actually killed over the weekend during this rise in violence. And, it's interesting when we're talking about this diplomacy that's been going on. Actually, I spoke with a Ukrainian diplomat a couple of weeks ago, and he said, as long as the diplomats are talking, the guns are silent. And that's true, but we've also seen that as long as the diplomats are talking, the guns are moving. And that's what has happened right across the border from where I am, about 25 miles away. We're starting to see huge numbers of very sophisticated armaments going into western, sort of southwestern Russia. Right across the border, we're seeing attack helicopters, fighter jets, self-propelled howitzers. We're seeing that S-400 anti-aircraft system. This is very imposing, and it's changed dramatically moment to moment. Guys?
So, Matt Bodner, NBC News obtained that letter, which we mentioned just a moment ago, that was sent to the United Nations. It says, we have credible information that indicates Russian forces are creating lists of identified Ukrainians to be killed or sent to camps following a military occupation. What else can you tell us about this letter and Russia's response to this allegation?
So I'm not sure I have too much to add on that one. Obviously, we've seen the letter. We know it was sent to the United Nations, but it's kind of, it's another one of these examples of U.S. intelligence making an assertion of just something that we can't see. But the Russians are responding to it. We heard this morning, again, at Peskov's briefing, that this is basically nonsense. They're not, really buying or, grappling with it too much beyond that. But it's just it just goes to show that there's a lot of concern about Russia's ultimate intentions here, what might happen. Tensions are high.
Matt Bodner and Matt Bradley, thank you both. Appreciate it.
Now, this morning, there's concern in the UK as Queen Elizabeth tested positive for COVID. Yesterday, Buckingham Palace released a statement saying the 95-year-old monarch is, quote, experiencing mild cold-like symptoms, but expects to continue light duties at Windsor over the coming week. She will continue to receive medical attention and follow all the appropriate guidelines. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson led global tributes, wishing the Queen a swift recovery and a rapid return to vibrant, good health. All of this comes while later today, Johnson is expected to announce plans to scrap remaining COVID restrictions in the UK. Hilary Fordwich is a British Royals commentator, and she joins us now. Hilary, good morning. Thanks so much for being with us. So, I mean, the Queen is not the latest royal to test positive. We probably remember her son Charles, his wife Camilla, both got COVID in the last couple of weeks. And as we know, though, Buckingham Palace is usually very guarded about the Queen's health. Often we don't hear about things till after they've happened. Why do you think they did decide to inform the public about this now?
Well, thank you for having me, Savannah, again. I would say a few things. There's what we call palacese. There's a code to what the palace releases. And you're right, in normal circumstances, oftentimes the press has actually found out about things afterwards. And I think it's due to that past track record that they've come out front of this, because obviously we saw the other day where she was greeting two military officers and said that she had difficulty standing up. And given that she's going to have some light duties but not be out in public, the palace wanted to get ahead of it this time and to get in front of it. Also, this is in consideration, of course, of relative other scandals that have been taking place. The palace code, of course, saying that she'll be continuing with light duties is saying that this isn't deadly serious. She has been what in the UK is referred to as jabbed 3 times, meaning she's had COVID shots. And you're right, Prince Charles had it, but also something that isn't very public. Numerous times last week at night, Prince Andrew was driven the 5 miles from Royal Lodge, where he lives on Windsor Great Park grounds. He was driven over to visit the Queen at night out of the view of the public. So Prince Andrew had gone over there. So she has received many people and been rather busy. But right now, they released this to get ahead of any kind of concern about her health and to let the nation know she is keeping calm and carrying on, and the British public should be too.
And I like how you put that there, kept calm and carry on. Hilary, what do you think light duties do mean? I mean, what kind of work will she be doing? Are we going to see her at all during this time that she's doing these light duties but isolating?
I suspect that we shall be seeing her, because she is one that wants to be out there. She has once been quoted as saying, to be seen is to be believed and to be appreciated. She wants to be there for her people. She serves her people. So one thing she is definitely continuing on, her equerry is bringing her red box. That red box is papers that she signs each day. She has been doing that. She also may be doing some meetings via Zoom. She did meet with 2 ambassadors last week via Zoom. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw that. But she will continue. Yes, as I mentioned before, she will keep calm and she will carry on as she's done and as she swore to do on her 21st birthday, to serve her nation and to serve her people, to carry out her duty.
Yeah, absolutely. Hilary, the Queen's known for, really rarely getting sick, but at this point, she is 95 years old, and there have been a few health scares recently, like in October when she spent the night in the hospital. What do we know about her medical team, the kind of care she's going to receive, and ultimately, what could happen if she is unable to fulfill some of these duties?
Well, you're absolutely right, Savannah. She's in top-notch health for somebody who's 95. I don't know many 95-year-olds who can do what she does. And there was concern, of course, when she was seen at Westminster Abbey when she was using a cane. Well, a lot of people use it 20 years before she has. So, yes, her health is very good. Her mother, don't forget, the Queen Mother lived to be over 103, and her mother, drank quite a bit and wasn't as healthy as the Queen. The Queen has never drank a lot. She never smoked like her sister, Princess Margaret, who died many years ago. Now to your question about sort of going forward and her health and who would take her place. Well, there's what's called she could issue letters which would then be instituting what are called councillors of state. Currently, there are 4 councillors of state. There's the Prince Charles, Prince William, and then rather controversially, there is still Prince Andrew and Prince Harry. They are actually amongst the 4 that could then, under these patents region, these are the patent letters, they could then be instituted to be conducting duties on her behalf. Now, the Regency Act of 1937 and 1953, that could also easily be enacted where other councillors of state could also be appointed. Now, there is an issue, obviously. Prince Harry is living in the United States. As a foreign resident, he could not be a councillor of state, but he purportedly is leasing his Frogmore Cottage property in the UK, and one might suspect particularly due to this. So at the moment, it would be pretty much Prince Charles, who also at the moment has COVID, but also Prince William, who'll be taking over. In the UK, there's a lot of also support for Princess Anne to take over.
All right, Hillary Fordwich, really interesting stuff there as we keep an eye on the Queen. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure, Savannah.
Here in the U.S. this morning, more states are rolling back COVID restrictions despite warnings from some of the top health experts in the country. Washington State and New Mexico are the latest states to drop their mandates. That leaves Hawaii as the only state still enforcing a mandate, which was put in place at the start of the pandemic in 2020. California Governor Gavin Newsom is expanding on his state's plan to move out of crisis mode.
People are naturally stressed and anxious about it and uncertain and confused. And so we wanted to lay out a blueprint. We spent about the last 2 months on this, looking at best practices around the world, getting experts all across this country to basically lay out a framework where we let people know we have your back. There's a sentinel component to this. We're going to be doing more wastewater efforts, more genomics. We got a brand new assessment unit that will have strike teams that go into communities if we're starting to see spread in real time. We're keeping master contracts open to get surge staffing. We're making sure we never, ever go back to where we were 2 years ago.
Even more changes could be in the works. The CDC is expected to update its mask guidelines as early as this week, but experts like Dr. Anthony Fauci worry these changes could be happening too quickly because vaccination rates remain stagnant in parts of the U.S. NBC News medical contributor Dr. Kavita Patel joins us with more on this. Dr. Patel, good morning to you. So what do you make of California's new plan against COVID? Do you think other states should follow their lead? And do you worry some states aren't making plans like this?
Yeah, Joe, good morning. I think that it's called the smarter plan for a reason. It's definitely a smarter approach to the approaches that many states have taken over the last 2 years. And it really hinges on, as the governor mentioned, surveillance and prevention. And that's going to be key. However, I don't see enough states doing this. And candidly, states don't have the kind of size and resources that California does. It is unique in that aspect. But I do think it's something that hopefully, as we see CDC guidance rolling out, as you mentioned, possibly this week, that we won't just talk about masks. We'll talk about all these other components that California does address: wastewater surveillance, testing, when we need to put masks or other measures back into place, and how we can protect people who may not be able to get vaccinated or may not be able to mount immunity. Millions of Americans still want to know some of those answers.
Let's go from West Coast to East Coast. New York City officials say they won't be enforcing a booster shot mandate for healthcare workers. Remind us, what does the science tell us how important booster shots are for protecting against COVID, and should they be part of our vaccine series?
Yeah, so the science tells us that a booster, especially in light of Omicron, can be incredibly helpful at preventing hospitalization and death. The science is definitely overwhelming in favor of boosters. Here's the problem that the governor faces in New York and many other states around the country. Last month, when she declared that all healthcare workers needed to have boosters, they came to fast forward to this week, and they found that only 75% of healthcare workers have been boosted, and that would leave a dramatic shorting staffage right at a time when we have such, we're seeing decreased hospitalizations, but we still need healthcare workers to be working to staff all our hospitals and clinics. So I think that the question, Joe, you're talking about is, will the CDC change fully vaccinated to include boosters? Not anytime soon, given what we just talked about, but it should update, and anybody should get a booster if they're eligible.
And quickly, Dr. Patel, while we have you, a question from an anonymous viewer about the possibility of super spreader events. They ask, what about Super Bowl, Valentine's Day, and other major events as super spreader events? Will those cases show up about mid-March? Your thoughts?
Yeah, all of these events could be super spreader events. Interestingly enough, the Javits Center Anime Convention that was held several months ago during the throes at the beginning of Omicron was not a super spreader event because of measures that they took to make sure that people wore masks and had good ventilation. Super Bowl, as we know, did not have masks, but did have requirements and expectations that people weren't sick. But I do think that hopefully the circulation that we saw will overcome some of the shouting and loud singing. But that, of course, is a very strong possibility. along with any crowded indoor events or even outdoor events where people are bunched up against each other.
All right, Dr. Patel, as always, thank you so much. Appreciate it. And if you have a question for one of our doctors, you can let us know. Email us at morningnewsnow@nbcuni.com with your questions. And like this viewer, you can let us know if you'd like to stay anonymous.
Now, closing arguments are set to begin today in the federal hate crimes trial of the three men convicted of killing Ahmaud Arbery. Greg McMichael, his son Travis McMichael, and William Roddy Bryan are charged with hate crimes and attempted kidnapping. The Department of Justice has alleged the men confronted Arbery because of his race. Last year, the men were convicted on state charges for Arbery's murder, and they each received a life sentence. This Wednesday marks 2 years since Ahmaud Arbery was killed while running near his home in Brunswick, Georgia. NBC News correspondent Blaine Alexander has been following this case since the beginning and joins us now along with NBC News legal analyst Danny Ceballos. Good morning to both of you. Thanks for being here. Blaine, I will begin with you and where we're at in this trial right now. The defense rested its case Friday. How did they try to prove that this case has nothing to do with race?
Well, Savannah, good morning to you. Really, their central argument all along has been that they did not decide to follow Ahmaud Arbery because of the color of his skin, because he's black, but rather because they thought that he was involved in a number of recent crimes that had happened around the neighborhood. So we've heard from the defense attorneys from their opening statements to the sole witness that they called on Friday, really trying to underscore that point. So the witness, and it should be stated that the prosecution called 20 witnesses to the stand. The defense, all three different defense attorneys, called one for all three defendants. And that was a neighbor, a fellow resident there in Satilla Shores, who essentially said that back in July of 2019, so that's about 7 months before Ahmaud Arbery was killed, that Greg McMichael had called 911 on a person that they saw living under the bridge, somebody that they believed, in their words, was possibly a sketchy individual, kind of loosely translated there, but that they called 911 on him and that was a white person. So essentially saying that they didn't do it because of the color of his skin, but again, they would call, they would be concerned about any person who they thought perhaps didn't belong in the neighborhood. Now, I do want to bring in the fact that one of the things that we saw so much from the prosecution is racist language, racist slurs, other things that were said against black people. During their opening statements, the defense attorney said, you know what? That's reprehensible. There's no defense for that. But that language, while of course it's offensive to so many people, does not prove that they chased down Ahmaud Arbery and ultimately killed him because he's a black person. Savannah.
Danny, let's bring you in here and talk about some of what we've seen or haven't seen so far. The McMichaels and Bryan chose not to take the stand in this trial. What'd you make of that decision, and how do we expect both sides to wrap their cases up today?
Good strategy, because if any of them take the stand, they're going to be cross-examined about these insanely racist, terrible things that they said in text messages and on social media. As to not calling witnesses, there is a jury instruction that specifically tells the jury just because the defense didn't call a bunch of witnesses doesn't mean that the defendants are guilty. And that's because of the burden of proof. I have often called 0 witnesses and rested only on the prosecution's burden, which is beyond a reasonable doubt and my client's presumption of innocence. So that is likely what they're going to argue. And in the case of all these racist messages, be warned, because the defense will argue essentially that, look, these defendants may have said horrible things, but that doesn't mean that on this day they denied Arbery the use of a road because of his race.
Now, Blaine, Arbery's family has been in the courtroom for 2 different trials now related to his murder. How's the family doing, and what are they hoping comes of this, and what the impact of this specific trial might be?
You know, Savannah, it's emotional for them. Remember, this is the second trial that they've had to sit through. They sat through the state trial last year. So this is now the second time that they're seeing this evidence of, for instance, their son's bloodied shirt or shotguns, or just kind of hearing again what happened to their son on that day back in February of 2020. You know, hearing from both parents as they've kind of spoken out after different days in court, both Marcus and Wanda say that they have faith. Wanda has said that she has faith that, you know, just as they saw back in the state trial, that this will be, they will essentially be victorious in this, that they will be found guilty in this. But it is something that, you know, when I've spoken with Ahmaud Arbery's mom, Wanda Cooper Jones, over a number of times over the past couple of years, she has really been steadfast in this thing that she wants to get justice for her son. She really wants to make sure the justice is seen through all the way to the end. That means sitting through another emotional trial. That means having these federal charges go all the way through, because she says that's what she promised to do for her son.
Blaine Alexander and Danny Savalos, both of your experiences and perspectives here are so appreciated. Thank you so much.
After 2+ weeks of competition and controversy, the Winter Olympics in Beijing wrapped up yesterday with the closing ceremony. NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson, who has been in the bubble from the beginning, has more on the final festivities.
Joe, Savannah, so sad to say goodbye, but it is a goodbye to Bing Duen, my guy, and the rest of the Beijing Games. As it wraps up in spectacular fashion, of course, the closing ceremonies lighting up the night sky over Beijing. Want to note the flag bearer, Alana Myers-Taylor for the U.S., now 5-time Olympic medalist, the most winningest black athlete in winter sports history, leading the charge after, remember, she had tested positive for COVID, was going to be the flag bearer for the opening ceremony, but had to isolate, so yet another victory for her as she led the team out of Beijing. We did have some action over the weekend, though. Jessie Diggins, my gosh, isn't she special? Winning again another silver medal, just barely getting over the finish line before collapsing. We found out later that she actually had food poisoning during the race. Incredible effort there to win another medal for Team USA. Also important to talk about Michaela Schifrin, as we had so many times. Now 0 for 6 in medals. Some of the most disappointing races were the slalom races. These are supposed to be Michaela Schifrin races, and she just wasn't able to pull through. But I think in the team event, placing 4th with Team USA, probably the best we've seen her and the most we've seen her smile. I think she will leave these games knowing that she is still a top competitor and one of the best skiers really in the world. Team USA collectively 25 medals, not too bad. 2 more than we got in Pyeongchang in 2018, but nowhere near, say, for instance, Norway. My gosh, 37 medals, 16 gold, shattering their own record for the most gold medals by an individual nation in the Winter Games again. Now the focus obviously turning to Paris for 2024 in the Summer Games, but still so much to celebrate here in Beijing as we wrap up, guys.
All right, Steve, thank you so much. Safe travels home.
Now let's get a check on your morning news now weather.
Michelle Grossman is with us. Good morning, Michelle.
Good morning to you both. Happy President's Day. And we are tracking our next winter storm, a new week, a new storm, and we're going to see this moving across the country once again. So we do have 15 million people under some sort of winter weather alerts. Let's go ahead and take a look at them because we do have winter storm warnings. That's in your pink. Your white is your winter storm advisory, and the blue is a winter storm watch. So we're going to see anywhere from 3 inches up to a foot of snow. Where you see the pinks and purples, that's going to be the heaviest snow, so parts of the Rockies into the upper Midwest. We'll be watching that today and also tomorrow. There's going to be a warm side too. We're getting closer to spring, so clashing those air masses. And we're looking at 9 million at risk tonight into the overnight hours for damaging winds gusting over 60 miles per hour, also large hail. And we can't rule out the chance of a few tornadoes. So where you see the yellow, that's the bullseye where we think we're going to see that severe weather. That threat moves off to the east tomorrow afternoon, another 9 million at risk. You can see it kind of expands a bit too into the Tennessee Valley. So now we're talking Memphis, Poplar Bluff, Nashville, Huntsville, Greenwood, into Jackson, Mississippi, seeing some of that severe weather. Also looking a lot of rainfall too. We could see up to 3 inches in some spots. Back to you guys.
Thank you very much, Michelle.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.